I'll be buried in my grave before I become a slave, yeah. That is what I heard them say way back in the day. I'll be buried in my grave before I become a slave, yeah, yeah. But it seems like since that day, yeah, we have sorely changed. I'll be buried in my grave before I become a slave, yeah, yeah. That is what I heard them say, yeah. Way back in the day. I'll be buried in my grave, yeah, before I become a slave, yeah, yeah. But it seems like since that day, yeah, we have sorely changed. Whoa. Hey, hey. Whoa, oh, 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 whoa, oh, 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 oh. Listen now.
And now, live from beautiful Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, you're watching My Fellow Americans with your host, Spike Cohen.
Hey guys, welcome to My Fellow Americans. I am literally Spike Cohen. This is Wednesday, July 16th of the current year, and I am still trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do with my hands. I've noticed it in previous episodes that you'll see that my knuckles start to creep up like this, and I put them down. So you will see that, and we'll have a knuckle watch. And if at the end of the show you can guess how many times my knuckles raised up correctly, then you will win. I don't know, you can come visit or something. We can go out for dinner. I don't know, we'll work on that. But thank you again for joining my show. This episode is not being live streamed. I had to accommodate my guest for this episode, and it was more than worth it. I absolutely love my guest. I can't wait to introduce him. As always, I would love to thank Matt and Mohammed at Muddied Waters Media for giving me this opportunity to do this show and to help promote it. I'd like to thank Kroger for this delicious water that I'll be drinking, Bula. The intro and outro music that I use is from one of my favorite musicians, Joe Davi. You can find him on Facebook, on SoundCloud, on Bandcamp. You can buy his stuff on Bandcamp. Shout out to Tehran Turks' Mominim. And a very special shout out to my father and Rabbi Harvey Cohen. It is going to be his 80th birthday this Sunday, and I'm so excited to celebrate with him. And I wish him 80 more years, if that's even possible. I wish him as many years as he can have. I love you very much, Dad. Happy birthday, and I can't wait to celebrate with you. Okay, folks, my guest tonight is one of my favorite political writers that is out there on the internet. He is a regular contributor at hotair.com, which is one of the leading right-of-center opinion sites on the internet. He's also appeared on NRA News, on Reason, on Watchdog, on United Liberty, and on Free Radical Network, among others. His work tends to focus on U.S. history, free markets, free speech, foreign policy, limited government, and justice reform. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming my guest, Taylor Millard. Taylor, thank you so much for joining our show today.
You flatter and scare me by saying that I'm one of your favorite writers on the interwebs, because I can think of about 80 to 200 who are much better than I am.
Well, good. Give me that list afterwards, and I'll run through them because I need a guest list. I have a couple dozen people, and I need to go past that, so that's perfect. So, but no, thank you again for joining my show. I'm really looking forward to talking with you about everything. My favorite things about your writings are how whenever I read any of your articles, I know that two things. I know that you're going to thoroughly flesh out the issue and talk about the fundamental principles behind them and the history behind them and everything else, and not just sort of a cursory glance of it. And the other thing I really like is your willingness and possibly eagerness to deal with trolls who are going to call you an America-hating cuck for being a libertarian. I appreciate both your thoroughness and your bravery in dealing with the sort of right-wing comment section that's gonna attack you every time you post something.
If there is one thing I have learned from the comic book character Spider Jerusalem, from Transmetropolitan, and no, that is a comic book that is only for adults. Kids, don't read it without your parents' permission. Parents wouldn't recommend you showing it to any kid until they're probably 17.
Okay.
What's the way to put it? Feed me your hate. It goes directly into my bloodstream, and I will ooze it out elsewhere.
It's only making you stronger. I can tell in it's like each article is going to be better than the next, and you're going to get more hate from it, and you're going to. I aspire one day to have, in my live streams, just my comment filled with, 4chan members just blasting me for what I write, and maybe
I had to actually. It's funny, one of the things that I learned because I wrote there was a piece I wrote on at Amy Mack, and about this was a couple of months ago, and it was looking at the First Amendment and the fact Huffington Post had written a piece basically exposing who she was,
right,
and pointing out that, hey, this is First Amendment activities, this is freedom of the press, right. This is not doxing. And I've been her before, where I was just starting out. I wrote something at Hot Air that was surprisingly controversial,
right.
And people got so mad they actually pulled up my LinkedIn. Well, the LinkedIn doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
I deleted it.
Okay.
And it's like, I had people grab, private photos from Facebook. But, if you're if you're a public figure or a semi-public figure, right. People are going to do that. Now, I'm not recommending people try to figure out,
someone's address or something.
What I do. Yeah. No. And don't publish that idiocy.
Right.
Like, it's for, the only reason, one of the reasons why I look at the comment section is for the doxing and the death threats.
Well, and there's, I'll tell you something. I'm not sure I've seen any death threats. I'm sure you've gotten them, but I don't think I've seen them. I just get a lot of, it's the same, it almost seems like, maybe it's for the Russian bots that we hear about, where it's the same kind of thing over and over again. They're just accusing you of the same thing. And a lot of times it's like, I don't think they read what you wrote. I think that really their comment could have just gone into anything any article. There's nothing in there that's specific to your article. But no, you're doing great with it, and you give me the bravery. You and others like you gave me the bravery to say, you know what, I think I don't really care, if strangers on the internet are going to dislike me. I still want to go out there and give it. So I appreciate that. Before we get into all this libertarian talk, this is something I've been wanting to ask you, and now I have you as a somewhat captive audience. And so I just want to ask, you have like most libertarians, you have an affinity for Vikings, and you even have Viking weapons. And I was just curious about where your interest in Viking culture started. Are you part Scandinavian, or is that just something that really interests you? Or
I actually found out a few months ago, earlier this year, I am indeed part Scandinavian.
Oh, cool. Okay.
There is one of my aunts traced my heritage, or traced his heritage, or her heritage, all the way back to Norway.
Oh wow, okay.
So and not by doing the 23andMe or whatever the whatever it is. Right. Yeah, the DNA. She actually went through the family tree and stuff like that.
Oh wow.
And traced it all down. I've always been interested in Vikings really since I was in my late teens, early 20s. I found medieval times to be like that time period to be fascinating to begin with.
Right.
I'm a history major. What do you expect?
Of course.
So when I went to originally I got a little bit into Knights Templar. I still find them kind of fascinating. I don't think they're as bad as France made them out to be. I don't think they're as good as some of their proponents say it. But you go and look at what all that has gone on, right? You go and you look at the history of it. And I found myself just being kind of enthralled by Norse mythology and then Vikings in general. And so that's how I got involved in it. And as I got older and older, it was like, I really find this fascinating. And, and so that's how I got into Vikings.
Yeah, it's really cool. I was interested in it because seeing the stuff that you posted, and then you had gotten an axe, and it was a Viking axe, right?
Yeah, I have a Viking axe. I have a sword. I wear a Mjolnir pendant, Thor's hammer pendant, which is funny because I'm a non-denominational Christian, but
that's cool. That's cool. And I assume you like the Thor comic book series, the that part of the Marvel universe, the Thor and the oh man, this is when I failed, but Thor and where is it? His father Odin and Loki and all of that stuff.
I've started liking it less, only because although what Jason Aaron is doing is actually really good. It's not necessarily it doesn't follow Norse mythology very well at all.
Okay.
Which sucks.
Right.
But it's still pretty good. I really like the work Jason Aaron is doing. The Jane Foster's Thor got a lot of controversy.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
And a part of that was because the way it was promoted. And then you go and you read the story and it's like, oh, but this is really good.
Right. But they presented it as this victory for women. They finally broke the glass ceiling of being Thor. Like,
the problem is, first off, the hammer, when you look at the the inscription that's on Thor's hammer, he who be worthy.
Right.
That's something Stan Lee did.
Right.
That's not actually on Mjolnir.
Right.
I'm staring at my copy of Mjolnir on my pendant, and no, there's
nothing on there about that. Yeah.
There's nothing on there about that.
Right.
So, it's one of those situations where there is obviously, comic books are going to have their own little thing. And, the issue that there was with that was just the way it was promoted, which was, again, this, oh my gosh, it's this wonderful, time for women and stuff like that.
Finally, it's our time to be Thor. Yeah, right.
And then you go and you look at the actual story, and not only did the story make sense, the story was really good.
Right. Yeah.
So this is one of those situations where you run into problems where, if marketing does it a certain way,
right,
it can turn off potential readers. That's why I didn't want to read it. And then I heard so much about how good it was from, even conservatives or libertarians were talking about, people who are not considered, what do they call it, third wave feminist?
Right. Intersectional feminism or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, we're talking about how good it was.
Right.
And it's like, well, I'll check it out.
Cool.
And it's really freaking good.
Well, good. I'm glad. So in terms of your libertarianism, what would you? Was there a a moment or a time that you would say that brought you to libertarianism, or is it, you've always sort of leaned more towards, aversion to authority, or at least, excessive authority? Was there, what kind of brought you to that, would you say?
Something, it really kind of took it was an interesting journey.
Okay.
I remember I was in high school, and I took that three-pronged, or the four quadrant test.
Right. Yeah.
And I was right on the line between conservative and libertarian, like legit right on the line.
Like top right and bottom right.
Yeah, top right and bottom right. I was right on that line.
Okay.
And the things where I disagreed were foreign policy and drugs. With the Libertarian Party standards. Everything else, though, we matched up. I mean, even on immigration.
Oh, okay.
And so the foundation was laid in high school. It probably wasn't until and then you read Ayn Rand.
Right.
It wasn't until I really fell in with Jason Pye, who's at FreedomWorks, fell in with Michelle Ray, aka Galt's Girl. That I really understood and started reading Reason Magazine a lot more.
Right.
So probably around 2012, that was where I really kind of understood, okay, these people, on the foreign policy standpoint, when people are talking about, maybe instead of wanting to be adventurous in foreign policy, maybe we should do trades with, maybe you ought to just let the free market work.
Right.
And let people, and let countries do, or not but let individuals in different countries do various different, financial transactions,
right.
Service goods, that sort of thing.
Right.
And so that was kind of that was the breaking point where I really went full libertarian.
Yeah.
And, there are, and it's interesting because one of the things I had to learn is, because I grew up in Texas, and in Texas, it's one of those things where, especially with a lot of, when you go to a Baptist high school and stuff like that,
right.
You get kind of taught that, okay, we're the ones who are supposed, since we follow, the way, the truth, the life.
Right.
Well, what we need to do is that we need to make sure our government does that too.
Right.
So
yeah.
we need to assert our morals over that.
Right.
And
Romans 13. Yeah.
And the more I thought about it, the more I was like, a lot of the stuff when God is talking about, and Paul is talking about, hey, let's do, let's, do unto others as you would want to,
right.
Be kind, take care of widows and orphans, that sort of thing. He's not talking about the government doing that. He's talking about the church doing that.
Us doing that, yeah.
Individuals doing that.
Right.
So that's where, and that was actually kind of the aha moment I had, in my, going from my 20s to my 30s.
Right.
Where it's like, oh.
Yep.
And because of that, that's where kind of it all changed, and, my eyes were opened, and I understood,
Right.
And then
right.
you hear about all the stupid laws that are out there. And it's like, does this really have to be a law?
Yeah. Is there a
Really?
reason for this? Yeah. Yeah, and I think I was in a similar place. My hang-ups were, I think my last hang-up that I had to give up truly was immigration, where I'm like, they need to protect us, and it was really like, no, they're actually infringing on my right to hire or host whomever I wish on my property, so they're actually violating my rights in the process as well. But it was kind of a similar thing, going back and actually reading the Bible for myself instead of taking in the sort of Americanized Judeo-Christianity version of the Bible, where it's all America's America is the promised land essentially, and sort of how when it's saying we, it means we collectively as the government, which is funny because then conservatives say that doesn't apply to things like healthcare and welfare, which they're right, but it doesn't apply to any of it. It's like you said, it's talking about what we should do and what the church should do. And then looking at the laws and thinking, what, I don't think this is correct. I'm curious to know who are your two things. Who are your favorite libertarian thinkers? And I guess most importantly, where do I rank amongst them?
Okay, so, it's funny, the discussion about immigration, right?
Right.
I had there was a thing where I was looking at, the immigration thing, right?
Right.
And and to a certain extent, I was like, I don't. I think the immigration thing is screwed up. Mm-hmm. I think the immigration system is screwed up.
Right.
But it's been this way, right?
Right.
And then I read a piece on travel, mm-hmm. on the freedom of travel by Judge Andrew Napolitano.
Right.
And he wrote this in 2013, I think it was. And it was like, oh, holy crap.
Right.
This is, you go and you look at the frickin' at the Constitution, and no, they don't
address it at all. Yeah.
They don't address it at all.
Yeah.
So
and using the constitutional literalist, interpretation. If the 10th Amendment says if it's not explicitly stated in the Constitution, then it doesn't fall under the federal government. It's for the states or I think it's the states and the people to decide. Meaning, it's left to the states essentially, and which is why the U.S. was, we call it open borders now, but it was essentially an open borders country until the late 19th century with all of the, China scare stuff and all the Chinese exclusion things. Up until then, it was a open, quote unquote, open borders country. There were still limitations to, there were still restrictions in terms of becoming a citizen, but in terms of just coming here, there really weren't any restrictions.
Yeah, and then you also look at the entire thing where it sits there, and you say, oh well, it's got the not only you got the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment actually sits there and applies everything to the rest of everything to the states,
right,
and then
right.
You look at the debates between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists and how they and that sort of thing. So, and the discussions about immigration and stuff like that, and it's really fascinating. To kind of dig into and look at. When it comes to libertarian, thinkers, I would be remiss if I didn't say Nick Gillespie was a big influence. Mm-hmm. Not only from a professional level, but also a personal level, and guidance and not to overstate the help he's given me, or understate the help he's given me. He's been helpful. I think he's a good writer. I think CJ Ciaramella from Reason Magazine is also a really good writer.
Okay.
Jason Pye, I cannot understate the help he's done for me from a discussion standpoint, from a legislative just kind of understanding how things work and stuff like that, and
right.
The freedom and what that exactly means. You go and you look at Also, Ayn Rand, I think, was an influence. If you read her We the Living book, the first the first half is really hard to get through,
right?
Because it's very, very stoic, I guess is the best way to put it. Okay. Stilted. There we go.
Right.
But then you get into the latter half, and it's like, oh my gosh, so this, socialist Russia. Yes, we all, from an American standpoint, we all heard how bad it was, right. And then, you hear the actual,
just how bad it was. Yeah.
Just how bad it was.
Right.
And it's like, oh, well, there's it was really that bad.
Right. It's not just this sort of abstract idea of oppression. It was like real people were actually suffering through this type of thing.
Right. So, We the Living, I think, is fantastic. Those are the ones kind of off the top of my head. Obviously, the Reason Crew has does a really, really good job. Ron Paul, even though I don't think, and sorry, Paulites, and I'm not trying to say that, in a mean way. I know there are a lot of Ron Paul fans out there. I don't think he's the best messenger. I think he's got some good ideas on stuff, and he's got some really good ideas on stuff, and I think that you have to sit there and credit him for being that Dr. No in
Congress, yeah,
in Congress, but I don't think he was always the best messenger. So that is so that's kind of something that, he was an influence, but I wouldn't say it was a major influence.
Okay.
You've got all these. I mean, Patrick Henry was an influence on me. Patrick Henry would be a libertarian these days, I think, even though, if you go back and you look at some of the stuff he did while governor of Virginia, where he was basically a dictator,
right,
during the colonial times,
he owned slaves as well. So
even though he struggled with it, and he admitted that he struggled.
Yeah,
with
he
it.
Actually, I read his a letter to a Quaker or a Quaker church where he probably wrote one of the most articulate explanations of the hypocrisy of American culture in accepting slaves. And I'm reading the whole thing and I'm thinking, yeah, but schmuck, you own slaves. And then he ends it by saying that, by saying like, yeah. I'm owning people basically for my comfort, and the idea of giving them up and having discomfort from that is too much for me to bear, even though I recognize how destructive and terrible and immoral of an institution it was. And it's like, man, I guess it's great that you're acknowledging that, but you died a slave owner. But I agree. I mean, in terms of his political thought, you would have to say he certainly expressed libertarian thought, if maybe not libertarian action in how he dealt with others.
Yeah, and and he was. There were obviously times where he was a hypocrite. I mean, there was somebody who he had jailed in during the colonial times without due process.
Oh wow.
And that was something that actually John Marshall, I think, pointed out in the constitutional debate. Was hey, you're a hypocrite. So there's like, you take people, you take what you can get, right. Kind of like all over.
Right. Especially with historical figures, because it's not like you can, you can't moralize with them now. They've been dead for however long. So you just sort of take the good things that they said and put it in context of the bad things they've said and done as well.
You have to, yeah. I mean, you look at Thomas Jefferson, who, talked about we'll be friends. We'll be enemies to none and friends to all.
Right.
And he did an embargo on, on English and French goods.
Right.
And you could sit there and you can say, well, he did the embargo because their pirates were taking American goods and stuff like that. And it's like, yeah, you can say that, but it still doesn't make. I mean, it gives context, but it doesn't make it right.
Right. Exactly. Now, as you know, I'm an anarchist. I know you tend to lean more towards, if not, minarchism, at least. If we're going to have a government, then it needs to be a small one, and it needs to stay bound. And we can get into what that actually means. Bound by what it says in the Constitution. This is a minarchist-friendly show. So I will try to avoid getting all wild-eyed and waving my hands around and ranting about the violent monopoly of the state for this episode. For this episode, I will not rant about violent monopolies, if at all possible. But I was curious about two things. One was your opinion of, for example, the government that was the original U.S. government, which was under the Articles of Confederation, versus the constitutional one now, and then also sort of the I guess coming from that, the stark difference between sort of the overtures to freedom and limited government that are in the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments, versus even say just Article 1, but the first the 7 articles of the Constitution, which really just kind of lay out, some would say, the ability to have, in some ways, a limitless government, or at least limitless in terms of taxation, and with some very good weasel wording in the habeas corpus clause to really let them do whatever they want to us if they decide they need to. It's sort of the juxtaposition between the Bill of Rights and Article 1, and then also I guess which you would think is better, the Articles of Confederation government or the Constitution government?
One of the things that was, and I need to do more study to the Articles of Confederation.
Okay.
I've not, and I'll admit it.
Okay.
One of the things though that was pointed out about the Articles of Confederation is that they really did make, the federal government too weak. From what was said by certain people when they were looking at war debt, when they were looking at the fact that apparently, what was it, Maryland and Virginia almost went to war with each other.
Right.
And so that was why they got together with, to do the Constitutional Convention originally, actually just to amend the Articles of Confederation.
Right.
And then, depending on who you talk to, the historical sources and stuff like that,
right,
either they surreptitiously tried to do a new government,
right,
or they did it because they realized that, in their opinion, the Articles of Confederation wasn't working.
The government wasn't strong enough, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Personal opinion, it would have been nice if they had just gone, everybody can do their own thing. We really don't care. That's what it would have been nice if they had done that.
Right.
Obviously that's not what they did. When it comes to, the arguments regarding the, if I'm 100% honest, right?
Right.
I again, 100% honest, my own personal opinion, right? Mm-hmm. I would, I'd prefer it if we didn't have a government.
Right.
Everybody can kind of can do their own thing, as long as they're not hurting anyone, as long as they're not, hurting anyone, taking people's stuff, threatening their life, liberty, etc.
Non-aggression principle, right?
Yeah.
Don't violate the NAP.
Yeah. And yes, that would mean that I would be against marauding bands of Vikings going out and, raiding
Nice.
and pillaging and stuff like that. I
appreciate that.
I would be one of the Vikings who was more of a trader, TRADER,
right.
than one who was a raider. But at the same time, when I try to look at things when I'm writing, I look at things from okay, what does the Constitution say?
Right.
And if the Constitution sits there and says, as I pull out my copy of the Constitution, which Cato Institute very nicely gave me, and I may have 10, 11 others in my possession, that's, I'll go back and I look at what the Constitution says.
Right.
And if the Constitution doesn't say something, then maybe, the federal government isn't supposed to be involved in it.
Right. If you're gonna, like I'd said before, if you're gonna have a government and we're calling it a limited government, then govern according to the charter, or else give up the pretense of this being a constitutional government and just admit that it's the direct democracy that H.L. Mencken warned us about 100 years ago. Stop pretending that this is some that we're operating under the rule of law of the Constitution, and just admit that this is a democracy that's going to take us where democracy always takes us.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Pretty much. And Mencken is somebody else who I've kind of rediscovered Mencken.
Yeah.
I've been reading him a lot recently, and maybe partially to a certain extent because I want to learn about his writing style, because that dude's got a way with words.
Yeah, he's prolific, or was a prolific writer. Yeah, absolutely. I haven't read a lot of Mencken, but there are two categories I would place Mencken under. One is stuff he's written and I really like it. I'm like, man, this guy's right about that. And then anything he writes about race, which goes into the cringe category. But I guess he's it's one of those take the good with the bad type of things. When he starts talking about non-white people, and it's like, oh wow, okay. And especially when you think back then that his concept of white was a lot different than what we consider white now. Probably half of Americans that identify as white wouldn't even be considered white. Not that would make it okay if he included them too, but when he writes about race, I'm like, oh, okay. And yeah, pretty much anything else he writes, I'm like, wow, that was pretty impressive for someone to be writing like that in the age of Teddy Roosevelt and so forth. So I wanted to ask you about specifically American history, and maybe this is true in other cultures as well. Why do you think that greater American society, if we could call it that, seems to have descended from being so averse to authority to almost, I don't want to say worship. I guess I do want to say worshiping authority, but or if not worshiping authority, worshiping the idea of authority, treating the rule of law as this sacrosanct thing that operates as this monolith. It's like manna from heaven that we get to partake in. It's not just people ruling over us. And do you think that that's just sort of a natural progression that happens in any state of society, or do you think it's the consequence of the fact that we're just so comfortable now that whatever brought us whatever we perceive as bringing us that comfort, that we're just okay with it, or a combination of that, or you think it's something else entirely?
Yes.
Honestly, all of those things.
Legit, legit, all of it.
I nailed it. Okay, perfect.
One of the things you have to look at it, is just 8 years after the colonial, after colonial America became the United States of America, right? There were no, there was a federal government, there was a, and all that, all that stuff, the Congress and, Congress in Washington. Even though there were a couple of days where they couldn't have Congress because no one was there.
Right.
Wouldn't it be nice if that's beside the point?
That. Yeah. Just don't go there. Just go home for a while.
Yeah. Go home. And no, don't go home to campaign. Just go home.
Just go home and stay home. Yeah.
Yeah. But when just 8 years. The Federalists saw the Democratic Republicans. There were more Democratic Republicans, people who agreed with Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and they were like, "Okay, we got to do something about it." So that's where the I can't believe that I cite it all the frickin' time in my hot air pieces, and I'm completely blanking on the Sedition Act and the
If you need a minute, that's okay. This isn't live, so if you need a second, you can gather your thoughts. I'll edit this out.
No, you can keep it in there because the alien and
And Sedition Act?
the Alien and Sedition Acts.
Right.
Thank you. You can keep that in there because it's good radio.
Okay, good.
It's good radio.
Okay, good.
The Alien and Sedition Acts. You had the Federalists sit there and they were like, okay, we have to. First off, we have to deport. You had the Alien Friends Act where it's like, okay, we can deport non-citizens who are quote unquote dangerous.
Right.
We can, if you make statements that may or may not be true about the federal government, hey, guess what? We're going to throw you in prison. And you had freaking, sitting congressmen get thrown in prison.
Right.
Matthew Lyon was one of them. You had people who did, who wrote stuff in papers. Hashtag fake news. Wrote stuff in papers criticizing the the government or whatever, and they got shut down and they got thrown in prison and so just 8 years basically,
right,
8 years after the U.S. government was formed, you had them going for the all-powerful state within that,
right.
Just after that.
So it was Animal Farm happening in real life, yeah.
Yeah, and so the thing that you run into when you look at this is that, the United States really was a radical experiment.
Right.
Really was a radical experiment. And you had people kind of realize, you had politicians kind of realize how radical it was, and they just wanted their people to be in power.
Right.
So they did what they could to keep their people in power.
Right. Yeah. So it became less about what was in the Declaration of Independence and more about like, okay, let's see what we can take from the Constitution to justify whatever level of power we can get. So then I guess in some ways we can say there's almost some mythology about how free, quote unquote, our ancestors were. I say our ancestors, but the people that lived in the U.S. before us, the people that came before us, that maybe it wasn't quite as free. I mean, first of all, if you were black, 99% of black people were enslaved, so there definitely was no freedom for them. So I mean,
I know.
And that's why it's cringy, because even when I was a constitutionalist and I would talk about back when things were more free, and I'd have to catch myself because I'm like, okay, yes, that's in aggregate, maybe that's true. But if you're looking at, there were, pretty substantial, especially where I am in South Carolina and where you are in Texas, there was a substantial population there that was not the least bit free. And when we pine for the days of the pre-Civil War freedoms that we had, when we pine for those quote unquote free days, we're really leaving out a lot of people. And I guess more importantly, we're not being accurate because there is some mythology there, right?
I remember Lecrae, the Christian rapper Lecrae, got a lot of heat a few years ago for an Independence Day tweet he made, which had slaves in the cotton field.
Right.
And something? He was right.
It happened.
You had the Spurs' most recent draft pick, Lonnie Walker IV.
Okay.
And I'm not a Spurs fan. I just happen to know who he is.
Okay.
And then deleted it on July 4th, saying, if you know your history, you'll never celebrate Independence Day.
Right.
Now, Lonnie Walker IV happens to be a black man.
Right.
And something? He's right. Is it a little, unseemly to post that? I guess if you want to put it, yeah. But something? He's right. And I can understand why certain people wouldn't, don't want to celebrate Independence Day.
Yeah.
Do I think that it's, when it comes to trying to, calm down the rhetoric and calm down the French Revolution-esque thing that we're in right now. Do I think that helps? No. I always think you should, I believe you should think before you tweet.
Right.
At the same time, I think there's truth to the comments by Lecrae and Lonnie Walker the Fourth.
Right. Yeah.
So I think there is this. One of the things that I find interesting about American history is you have this is what I remember from high school and middle school. Okay. The colonies weren't being treated right by England.
Right.
So the colonies decided to rebel against England. Mm-hmm. So you had the Revolutionary War, and we won. And then the Articles of Confederation really weren't working. They don't tell you why.
They just say
they
weren't powerful enough. Yeah.
Yeah, they just say they weren't working. So okay, we put in the Constitution, and the Constitution was great. Yes, slavery was an issue. The Constitution was great. And then you had the Civil War, and then everything was pretty much fine until the Civil Rights era started, and people started having, issues with that. And there's like
they touch on stuff like it was like, oh, and then we realized this was bad. Yeah.
Without sitting there and actually, how about we have a discussion about the fact that, although I will credit Mr. Richardson at First Baptist Academy for being willing to discuss why the 3/5 compromise happened.
Yeah.
And the 3/5 compromises were basically 3 of every 5 slaves were counted as a person, if I'm remembering that correct.
For the census, yeah.
For the census, yeah. And, I appreciated the fact that he was willing to discuss that.
Right.
And willing to say, I wish there had been a little bit more of a debate about it, but there wasn't.
Right.
There's, I think the thing that we run into is that when we look at our, quote, heroes of America, right? Mm-hmm. Heroes of American history. Nobody is willing to talk about the bad to go with the good
at all. Like they're almost, and that's where it becomes almost religious. In that, in fact, it goes past religious because we talk about the things that are in the Bible about the bad things that King David did, and the bad things that Moses did, or the failures that Moses had, or the bad things Noah did. But when we talk about founders, there's a subset of people that are like, no, they were great. And if you try to talk about that stuff, they get really defensive. And I say me. I was one of these people for at least some time that got very, very defensive about it. And it was like, would you defend, Noah the same way that you're defending this guy? What is your emotional tie to defending these people tooth and nail that were A, not perfect, just like all of us, and B, some of them had some really kind of scummy behavior. I mean, people that tend to rise to power, a lot of times there's a lot of sociopathy involved there, and this is my anarchist talking again. But but it's true. I mean, you look at these people, and some of them were outright scum. I mean, Ben Franklin, who was apparently incredibly racist, and even just, against non-whites, including Germans. He didn't see them as white. If you want to ever read someone talk about, say horrible things about German people, Ben Franklin writes about Germans the way that Pat Buchanan writes about Mexicans. And
God.
That's my zinger. You look at some of the way that these people lived, and it's like the things they did, especially in the filter of how many of them owned slaves and the way that they treated them. I mean, it's one thing to say, oh, you owned people. Thomas Jefferson raped women. They had children, and then he enslaved his own children and never let them go. And but yet we can unironically say he's possibly one of the most libertarian leaning founders. Well, what does that say about the founders? So I think it is healthy to have those kind of discussions, because otherwise we end up in this sort of cultish thing where it's like, oh, the founders, peace be upon them, and the way that you talk about them. So I think that's a good thing. I find it interesting that in both the quote unquote right and left side of the authoritarian spectrum, and really for all of us, we all celebrate rebel figures, right? So like, not just historically, not just in, historical figures like, George Washington when he was fighting it, not George Washington the president, but George Washington the revolutionary, and we look at all these revolutionary figures of the past, and then in what we watch in movies and TV, the Neo and all the people with in the Matrix, and the rebellion and the Rebel Alliance in Star Wars, and all of these different, it seems like we always celebrate the rebel, but then in real life we will, appeal. We might have certain parts of the government that we don't like, or certain politicians we don't like, but then we, appeal to authority to protect or care for us, or, make sure things are fair for us, or whatever else. Is that just sort of do you think that that's sort of a natural human hypocrisy, or do you think that's a government conditioned thing?
Yes.
I'm nailing these questions, right?
It's one of those situations where when you sit there and you look at it, right?
Right.
And you look at the situations where, it's there's this weird thing where you have people who are like, hey, we want to rebel, or be yourself. Or do what you want to do.
Right.
Live your own life.
Yeah.
And then most of these guys are these people are sitting there and saying, do that, and but if you try to do that, we're going to kick you out. Or we're gonna charge you with being, be different, but no, you can't.
Right.
And so that's the really interesting, thing that you run into. And
right.
A part of it is, you have people who they want to celebrate, the rebel, but they know that you can't celebrate the rebel too much, because if you celebrate the rebel too much, then you get people to start thinking.
Right. Then it'll be anarchy, which is, terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's exactly like you said. I mean, it's they're what I like the way I like to say it is, people are essentially saying, don't harm me, harm them. Like, I don't want, don't use government against me, use government against them over there. And that's why people hate each other so much in any statist society. I'm doing it again. I'm going into full anarchy mode, but I can't.
Hey, go ahead.
I'm sorry,
okay.
I can't help myself.
Go ahead.
But, in these societies, it becomes this sort of codependent, passive-aggressive thing where instead of being violent against each other directly, although that happens sometimes, we hate those libtards, we hate those Nazi conservatives, and so instead of, doing something about it and being violent against them directly, we sort of passive-aggressively use our vote as a proxy act of violence through government to say, no, you hurt them over there, no, you make them bake that cake for my gay wedding, because I don't like that they are against my gay wedding. No, you make them, if they're hiring, immigrants that haven't, signed, the paperwork, or haven't, paid the government fees to be allowed to live here, that, kick them out and throw their employer in jail. And it's sort of this, like, instead of saying, I don't like this, so I'm going to live differently from it, or even I don't like this, so I'm going to stop them. It's like, I don't like this, so I'm going to vote to have people with guns force them to live the way I want them to, which is, sort of this toxic, codependent relationship that we all live in American society. I shouldn't say American society, really in any statist society. Something that's interesting, we had talked about Mencken and I love how he writes about democracy, which it seems like now both Republicans and Democrats just love democracy, even though Republicans will say, this isn't a democracy, it's a republic. yeah, it's a democratic republic, but it is a form of democracy, and so they all kind of appeal to the will of the people that they were just saying are total morons a few seconds ago, but the will of the people. If you look at this lady in New York City who just unseated an incumbent in the primary, and now she's running. I think her name. I hope I pronounce this correctly. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She's had sort of this meteoric rise, although I guess meteors fall, so I've never understood that phrase. But she's had this incredible rise because she's young and she's dynamic and she's a socialist. And it was interesting that in one of her first interviews, she apparently doesn't really know that much, and it was kind of admitted that she had a lot to learn and didn't know a lot. She did say that she thought that she could solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, even though she really didn't seem to know much about it. But she was gonna show them how much she was gonna use the Care Bear stare and fix all of that. And then she said something about how the unemployment rate was low because some people had multiple jobs or something. Like, I mean, there's just a lot of. She's an economics major that doesn't understand how the U6 is counted. But I and maybe I'm the only one doing this. I'm sure there are others. I found so many similarities between her and the rise of Trump politically, because obviously Trump in the private sector world has much more experience than she does. But in the political world, they both sort of rose almost out of nowhere. Even though in many ways they both sound like they really don't know what they're talking about. And so there's sort of a demagogue thing going there where people are filling their empty suits with their hopes and dreams. And it sort of goes back to what, Mencken had said about democracy, that eventually democracy will be perfected and we will elect I think he said an outright moron to the White House. And I just want to get your thoughts on that. Have we reached peak democracy or are we going straight to idiocracy zone?
Get back to me in 2020 when we find out if Trump is going to have Kanye as his running mate or not.
Which again, as an anarchist, the more absurd it gets, I'm so entertained by Trump. I'm horrified at times as well. But if he became Kanye, if it was Trump West 2020, I wouldn't vote for it. But I might put up a sign or two just for pure entertainment purposes.
And I will say this about Kanye. I do appreciate his willingness to read other stuff, because I think that's something that people need to do. They get caught in their bubble and they don't branch out. Now,
echo chamber,
yeah. Now, to a certain extent, I'm really not interested in reading Newt Gingrich's newest Understanding Trump book. I'm really not interested in that, because Newt is just trying to get money.
Right,
that's all he's trying to do.
Of course. And we know what Newt thinks at this point. I think I have Newt covered in terms of his
and he's actually he's one of the smartest people you'll ever meet.
Yeah. And
sometimes he's too smart for his own good.
Right.
But there's nothing. I mean, sitting there and looking at, taking a look at what we'll just say Mother Jones says, or National Review, or Think Progress or stuff. There's nothing wrong with doing that.
No.
There's nothing wrong with actually, reading, the New Yorker, or reading,
Salon, or
Salon.
Well,
you can read Salon for the entertainment. I was going to say the Weekly Standard. There's nothing wrong with or reading the editorial page in in your local newspaper, even though there's stuff that isn't necessarily there's some stuff that's actually really bad. It's like, really.
That's why they're in the local newspaper. Yeah, exactly.
There's one columnist who actually I like her for the Dallas Morning News. I like her husband. She just retired. And there's on the off chance that she and her husband listen, I'm not going to say their names. But there was a piece I read from her about the Second Amendment, and I was like, no, that's not, no.
Right, please stop. Yeah, exactly.
Especially 24 hours within a tragedy. No, stop that.
Yeah.
So you have to look at kind of everything. And, when it comes to the gal in New York, Ocasio-Cortez, yeah.
Right.
There are, first off, I think it's kind of interesting that you've got Joe Lieberman, actually sitting there and telling people that they need to vote for the Republican, which I found really interesting.
Right.
Vote for Joe Crowley in November, not for
the guy she beat.
Yeah, the guy she beat.
Yeah. Okay.
So I guess a write-in is what.
Right. No, because he's actually, so the way that New York politics work, that guy is still officially on the ballot under the Working Families Party, even though they've officially said that they don't want him. They want Ocasio-Cortez to win, but because of the ridiculous rules with New York's ballot, he is. I guess they had already I guess they'd assumed he was going to win, and so he's there. So he's still on the ballot.
It's like Ocasio-Cortez is the Reform Party candidate. Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
It's actually, he's almost the Reform Party candidate because he's on the Working Party's family, which is like sort of this side party that aligns with the Democrats. She's the Democratic candidate, so he's the Rebel Alliance now. Even though the Rebel Alliance hates him, yeah.
Yeah, it's if you go and you look at her at her website, right? And you go and you look at what she says she stands for and stuff like that.
Right.
It's a lot of. I mean, there's Medicare for all, housing as a human right, a peace economy, criminal justice reform in private. Okay, we can discuss that. I'm not necessarily against ending private prisons. I'm willing to talk about it more.
Right.
Let's talk about it. Immigration justice, abolish ICE. But that was something that she was a big thing about, right?
Right.
And listen, I'm actually in favor of abolishing ICE, but along with a lot of other stuff.
Yeah. Pretty much all of Homeland Security, as well as all the stuff she wants to introduce. Yeah.
But if you look at it, right, and I'm reading directly from her website, okay? The Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency was created in 2003 in the same suite of post 9/11 legislation as the Patriot Act and the Iraq War. It's same suite of. Okay, that's kind of interesting that she's putting the Iraq War as legislation. I mean, they did. It's not necessarily legislation, I would say, but. Right. Its founding was part of an unchecked expansion of executive powers that led to the widespread erosion of American civil rights. Unlike, and this is the key thing, all right? Unlike prior immigration enforcement under the INS, ICE operates outside the scope of the Department of Justice and is unaccountable to our nation's standards of due process. Alien Gonzalez was not available for comment.
Exactly. That my first thought was the picture of the guy pointing the gun at Alien and his father, aunt?
It was his aunt, I think.
His aunt. And I'm like, oh yeah, no, he was well within. That was definitely within the scope of due process and going in Waco style and holding the kid up in the closet.
As overseen by the Trump administration. Okay, I'm skipping the part where she talks about now we see the consequences, young people. Yeah, I'm skipping that.
Right.
As overseen by the Trump administration, ICE operates with virtually no accountability, ripping apart families and holding our friends and neighbors indefinitely in inhumane detention centers scattered across the United States. Alex believes that if we are to uphold civic justice, we must abolish ICE and see to it that our undocumented neighbors are treated with the dignity and respect owed to all people, regardless of citizen status. Okay. I mean, that's
What's your policy proposal?
Yeah, what's your policy
exactly,
proposal?
Yeah, civic.
She supports the Dream Act, but great. But what's
Okay.
your
Outside of it, because the Dream Act is not a fix. If we're calling this a problem, because my fix is abolish all of it. But even going outside of my pure anarchy dream world of where you can buy nuclear weapons at the local CVS. Outside of that, the next one in reality land would be, okay, great, abolish it and replace it with a system of having the states manage it. I mean, like, if someone asked me for a policy proposal, I could flesh one out. She's running for, is running for Congress, is the Democrat nominee, and is still talking about, using catchphrases, civic justice and our undocumented friends. It's like, okay, at this point, this is when you actually say what you would like to do legislatively. But again, Trump did a lot of that. Like, and he
absolutely.
So I mean, I really like it's amazing how we've reached a point where you literally can just win on catchphrases and then govern on catchphrases. Like, it's just like it's that joke about that the kid that promises free ice cream. That one candidate for school president, class president, has all of these very specific ideas of what he or she wants to have changed, and has very very professional presentation, and then the other kid gets up and goes, free ice cream every day, and they all vote for that kid, and we are this like free ice cream democracy, and I mean, that's how you end up with 21 trillion plus and counting in Federal Reserve note debt, that just and a never-ending growth of it, despite tech record tax receipts and everything else, is by people voting based on like who touches their feels the most.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, yeah, the populist right and the populist left are are pretty much almost the exact same.
It's rhetoric. Rhetoric is the only difference. They both, like when Bernie Sanders, to his credit, even though I disagree with him on it, he didn't back down on the. I mean, I'm sure he's saying abolish ICE right now, but when they asked him about essentially open borders, he's like, no, that's a Koch brothers thing. We don't want open borders because it reduces. It lowers the wage, and it's a race to the bottom, and all of the. I mean, immigration restriction, as was a traditional plank of the left. I mean, that it was the unions pushing for that. It was the the whole Chinese scare thing was drummed up to shore up union labor and all of that. So I mean, what's his name? I'm trying to remember the Julio. Cesar Chavez.
Cesar Chavez?
Yeah, Cesar Chavez, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Cesar Chavez, who was the very well-known union, so well-known I couldn't remember his name. Union, pro-union activist.
Alien and Sedition Act.
Yeah, Alien and Sedition Act. And I'm keeping this one in solidarity with you. Brain fart people unite. As one, but he was very much. I mean, he used the term wetback to describe illegals, and the guy was Mexican or Mexican American, and and you're right. It is the populist right is just the populist left using different rhetoric, but in many ways the same. I mean, are we not going to see Trump talk about Medicare for all in the next few years? Like, are we not around the bend on that? You
mean what he talked about in his 2015 in his July or June 2015 speech in Phoenix when he said, "I know this isn't conservative, but get over it, conservatives. We have to take care of them.
Yeah,
we have to.
Right. Yeah, something like that. He in the very first Republican debate, which I made the mistake of watching, he praised Canada's system, and in the past had praised Scotland's the national healthcare system with the UK. So I mean, he's pretty clear. I mean, now he's I want free market healthcare, but
no, he doesn't.
I'm kind of scared of a lame duck Trump for pure entertainment value. I wouldn't mind seeing. But I'm also scared of a lame duck Trump that isn't worried anymore about keeping, conservative activists happy anymore, or at least placated. I can very well picture him joining hands with what is possibly going to be a Democrat-run Congress at that point, and passing some stuff that Hillary would have never had the chops to pass. for the left. So I guess we'll all learn that pretty soon, because I do think I think he's going to get reelected for the same reason he got elected, because he has the strongest, he has the biggest single base of support around a cult of personalities around Trump. Maybe you think differently, but I think he is unless an Obama-like figure comes forward, I think a Trump re-election is a foregone conclusion at this point. Do you?
I have no idea.
Yeah,
I think, I mean, the problem that you run into is that, yes, Trump may agree with Bernie Sanders a lot more than he agrees with, Mitt Romney.
Right.
On stuff.
Yeah.
But there's, we'll see. I'm not. Yeah, I don't know what else to say about that.
Yeah. I don't know, and I'm not a great my history of predicting things. I was sure that people would wake up, quote unquote, to Trump and pick someone serious in the Republican primary. I was wrong. Then I was sure that he was a Clinton plant that was going to make sure that Hillary won, and that didn't happen either. So at this point, really, I'm not a good guidepost for the electoral outcomes, at least not on the federal level. I feel good about Trump. No, I don't feel good, but I feel good about my prediction about Trump getting reelected. But we'll see. So as you know, Trump was just in Helsinki and met with Putin and had said some stuff about how he it initially sounded like he was saying he believed Putin more than U.S. intelligence community about whether Russian government had interfered in the U.S. elections, and then I guess now he has walked it back and said, "Oh no, I meant that they clearly were involved." I enjoyed the 24-hour period where the left was suddenly very supportive of our U.S. intelligence community. That Bush lied, people died crowd was now saying that we need to trust the U.S. intelligence, at least if they're saying something that Trump didn't say. Trump was, now they're saying Trump was a traitor. He was high treason. He was guilty of.
Beto O'Rourke actually said he needed to be impeached.
The
Democratic candidate for Senate here in Texas against Ted Cruz.
Yeah, one Steiny Hoyer, if I'm saying his name correctly. He said treason. I don't know if he was proposing a trial where he'd be hanged, but I mean they're using the big talk for this stuff, and I just find it hilarious because these are the people that they want Trump simultaneously to be in charge of our health care and to surrender all of our guns to him, but he's also a traitor. I think that's hilarious, but. It was something Rand Paul had said in at least one interview. He talked about the fact, I'm sure Ron Paul's out there saying it too, the U.S. government, if we want to complain about meddling in other countries' elections, the U.S. government has a very storied history. Even you don't even have to go outside of this, out of the Americas to see all of the not just direct and indirect meddling in other countries' elections. And I'm curious what you think of our insistence that our election system have the quote unquote be pure and untainted, and yet we can smash anyone else's system as we see fit.
All right, so a few things. One is I think the biggest problem that you run into is this shows that both sides of the aisle love their authoritarians.
Right.
I mean, you look at it, Trump is sitting there and he's praised Putin.
Yep.
He praised Erdogan, or however, the Turkish president.
The Turkish president.
Yeah, the Turkish president.
Right.
He's praised the Chinese president. He's praised Kim Jong-un. And at the same time, you go and you look at what the left has said about Hugo Chavez,
right.
Who is not a good guy.
No.
At all.
No.
But he's they're perfectly fine.
Right.
With, you have that. You have those comments. You have some of the comments that were made about Fidel Castro, and you have
Che. I mean, they're number one. The person they love to have on their shirts and hats, Che Guevara, who killed gay people and hated black people and was a horrible authoritarian and tortured people and everything else. He's now a symbol of freedom and justice for all.
Yeah. So you have, so that's the thing. You have the right and the left.
Right.
They both fall into their entire, we love our authoritarianism.
Right,
and
right.
that's the bigger problem.
Yep.
Right?
Right.
That's the bigger problem that you run into.
Right.
And listen, there's nothing wrong with having conversations and doing diplomacy with countries, depending obviously on how there's a fine line between diplomacy and enabling.
Right.
And the problem that you run into is that for far too often, the U.S. has been more willing to enable. I mean, you look at the dictators. You go back to George W.'s, where there was the I forget who it was. In one of the stands, it may have been Kyrgyzstan for all I remember, but horrible dictator, and the U.S. was kind of cozying up to him.
Right.
The U.S. has cozied up to the Saudi royal family.
Oh, very much so. Yeah.
And yes, it looks like the prince is, he's certainly into reforms, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
But there's a difference between cozying up and diplomacy.
Well, it's accepting the reality of power. That's who's in charge. So if I want to talk to someone and get something done, that's who I got to talk to. I can ignore them if I want to, but that's who's in charge. So yeah.
You can do diplomacy, right? You can
right.
establish. Of course, my opinion is the best way to get reform, and it won't be immediate reform, but it will still be reform on the long term. And yes, it sucks that it's not immediate reform.
Right.
Is to sit there and say, okay, let's do this. We're going to we'll do free trade. Let's do free trade. Let's do free trade.
Right.
Let's discuss things. We'll have our businesses do business with your people, and I think that's the best way, honestly,
Yep.
to get stuff done, and to see freedom and liberty expand in the U.S. or around not just in the U.S. but
around
globally.
the world. Yeah, I mean, free trade has lifted most of the world out of poverty. The number of places where there is outright abject poverty and starvation is at an all-time low and is diminishing even in the midst of economic depressions or economic recessions and recoveries. Trade continues to raise up the living standards everywhere, including here. And so I've never understood, or I guess I do understand. I understand that it takes a level of economic and social illiteracy to be against trade. I think it's the finest diplomacy at all. It's not commanded top-down diplomacy. It's like you said. It's people, individuals, and individual organizations working with other individuals and organizations for mutually beneficial needs and finding ways to meet everyone's needs in a mutually beneficial way. So I definitely agree with you on that. So one last question before you go, and I really appreciate your time again for being on the show. Thoughts on Helsinki and with Trump's overtures to Putin? Do you think that he's doing diplomacy for peace? Do you think he's the Russian Manchurian candidate that that the left is painting him as, or do you think it's just that he likes strong men and Putin's kind of the strong man, and so he has an affinity for him? Or what do you think that the thought process behind that is?
I think he likes strong men, and he likes strong men politicians, and that's why he's doing it. I also think that there's nothing wrong with wrong with having conversations. But at the same time, I think the problem that you're running into is he's enabling them as well. He's enabling Putin as well by very much being this, oh my gosh, you're a wonderful person. I looked into his eyes and, That's the issue that you run into.
Right, exactly.
And that's what he's doing.
Yep.
There's nothing wrong with having conversations. There's nothing wrong with engaging in diplomacy. But again, there's a difference between diplomacy and enabling, and I think right now he's enabling more than he is diplomatic.
Right. You can date him, but don't kiss him. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Well, Taylor, thank you again for your time. Ladies and gentlemen, Taylor Millard, if you want to check him out, he is on hotair.com. Again, one of my favorite people out there. I like a few of the writers on there, a couple I could do without, but I really, really like Taylor. Taylor, by the way, does not agree with that. He loves all of the writers at Hot Air. I know that inherently. Taylor, thank you again for your time. Thank you so much.
Hey, happy to help out.
Thanks a lot. Well, guys, yet again, thank you so much for joining me for another episode of My Fellow Americans. I was hoping to have my new AV equipment, my new microphone. I got all this fancy microphone and new webcam and everything that I was hoping to have for this episode, but it didn't get here in time. I should be getting it today or tomorrow, so hopefully we'll have that for next week. So anyway, please be sure to comment on our YouTube or Facebook or our SoundCloud or wherever you're seeing this. Be sure to leave a comment and tell us what you think of it, so I can reply, tell you whether you're right or wrong. Also, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and check us out on our website, muddywatersoffreedom.com, and also Muddied Waters of Freedom on SoundCloud and on Facebook. But definitely, please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks again, and I'll see you guys next time.
Imagine knowing all that started off that war was pride and lies. Be a man, hold it in your eyes. Take a look up in the sky and count the doves. I believe it's 23. Every breath is every step that I've been blessed to get to breathe. Rather let you rest in praises as opposed to rest in peace. At the least, that's just me being me. Convoluted as can be. In my future, I can view it so vivid and beautifully. The distances I will leap from the man that I used to be. But now, summer doesn't exist anymore. Best case scenario, I get to finish the tour. Then chill with the gust in August before I march and march again. Dayquil in April, I know how cold this art can get. My head hurting, I must have a lot on my mind. When I got time on my hands, they put hands on my time. my friend. In reality, you are my kin, though I view the world through another's iris. If you slide in my kicks, it might fit. We might just unite and come together, become hybrid, at the least slightly like-minded. Indeed, the life I've lived brings light to kindness. All you need is a sign. Put a cease to the crimes, put an ease to the minds like mine. Sometimes darkness is all I find. You know what they say about an eye for an eye in a time when the blind lead the blind. Who am I to deny I would cry when a loved one dies? I recognize that body outside, but the holes in the body that was alive, now confined to a chalk outline. Find out how, but you never know why. It ain't even make it to the news at 9. It ain't even make it to the news at 9. That's my sister, mother, father, brother, son. That's one of mine. All these years I close my eyes, open up to only find I'm in line. There's a pointless murder happening all the time. Either lose your life or mine, caught up in them versus I. That ain't how it started, nah. How were we supposed to survive? There's a war going on outside. Who would want to raise a child whom the tomb is flashing by? Now you have to say goodbye when you watch them on the news at 5. Don't tell me how, tell me why.